It's May 21st, 2010. Me and my boy Troy just graduated from high school, and we decided to celebrate the way only two nerdy 17-year-olds know how. Chilling in a GameStop before going to see a movie. After not buying anything with our broke asses, we head to the Herkins Timmy Marketplace to watch one of our most anticipated movies of the year, behind only Scott Pilgrim and Inception. I'm talking, of course, about MacGruber, because obviously, you click the thumbnail. It was the opening Friday night and the theater was packed. Timby Marketplace is right down the street from ASU, so the crowd was mostly late teens, early 20s, aka the prime demographic. One of the benefits of being in a college town is that everyone was firmly riding this movie's wavelength. It was one of those fun theater going experiences where everyone is having a good time for the same reason. The movie ends, everyone is chuckling and talking about what they thought was the funniest bit as we're walking out of the theater, and I turned to Troy like, man, I think this movie's gonna do good if this crowd is anything to go by. Turns out, the crowd wasn't anything to go by. MacGruber made only $4 million its opening weekend, coming in 6th place. Shrek Forever After was #1 for those concerned. Shrek is Love, Shrek is Life, you know the drill. Not only did the movie open week, it got a C- cinema score, received mixed reviews, and wouldn't recoup its initial production costs in theaters. And for 14 years, I found this insane. MacGruber is a hilarious and loving parody of the 80s, 90s action flick. Is it the best SNL movie? No. That crown will likely always belong to Wayne's World, but it's still up there. Like, probably only behind the Wayne's World movies. But before we get into why MacGruber banks, please leave a like and subscribe. It greatly helps the channel. I'm trying to get up to 1,000 subs by the end of the year, and I can only do that thanks to viewers like you. So, SNL movies don't exactly have the best track record. It's one thing to turn a TV show into a movie, but turning a sketch into a feature film is no easy task. While the Blues Brothers and both Wayne's World films are among some of the best comedy films ever made, the rest of the SNL film canon is generally not well regarded. I mean, shoot, It's Pat is not only considered one of the worst comedies ever made, but straight up one of the worst films ever made, full stop. Stuart Saves His Family is just weird. And while I have a soft spot for Annette Roxbury because I grew up with it, I don't know if the movie would work for anyone who wasn't young in the late 90s, early 2000s. Straight up, I think getting a "did you just grab my ass" reference might be a marker of age. The biggest problem for the majority of SNL films is that they generally feel like one-note sketches stretched out to feature length. While a quirky character can carry a sketch for 5 to 7 minutes, it's a tall ask to sustain that for 80 to 90 minutes. Just look at what happened to the Pirates movies when they made Jack Sparrow the main character. MacGruber manages to effectively sidestep this problem by building a by-the-numbers classic action flick and then plopping in the chaos engine that is MacGruber. So, MacGruber was the directorial debut of Jorma Taccone, who you may know as 1/3 of The Lonely Island. It was written by Taccone, John Solomon, and Will Forte, who also stars as the titular character. At the start of the film, MacGruber is retired in a remote village after his wife was straight up exploded during their wedding. Colonel Jim Faith and Lieutenant Dixon Piper try to coax him out after Dieter von Kuntz, MacGruber's arch nemesis and the man who killed his wife, steals a nuclear warhead. At first, he refuses to join the team, but the desire for revenge proves too strong to resist. He grabs his gear, heads to the Pentagon, and tells the colonel he's in. The colonel initially wants MacGruber to include Piper on the team, but Groobs roundly refuses, instead opting to headbutt Dixon in the face and go recruit a team of his old war buddies. This leads to one of the funniest and best sequences of the film, and it's only better if you, like me, are a WWE fan, as it has Chris Jericho, MVP, Mark Henry, Kane, The Great Khali, and Big Show. Quite frankly, I would have loved a MacGruber prequel just to see, what that team was like in action. After he gets them all together, Groobs goes to recruit Vicky St. Elmo, his dead wife's best friend. She initially refuses as she wants to focus on her music career. Like with bangers like this.
But 4 is the perfect number for sure. If it's 2 kids and me and
you can't help but understand. So with the team all assembled in the van ready to roll out, we get one of the movie's most iconic bits.
Because the trunk is filled with over 75 pounds of homemade C4 explosive that I personally packed in there with my own two.
After burying the homies, Colonel Faith takes MacGruber off the mission. He begs Piper to join him, even offering to fuck anything in the Colonel's office to get him on board.
Just tell me what you want me to fuck!
Piper eventually relents and Vicky shows up in the nick of time. So, with the team fully assembled, Grubbs, Dixon, and Vicky are off to pound some cunt. MacGruber gets a lot of mileage out of having a protagonist who has no business leading this type of movie. Let's just run through the initial sequence of events. As soon as they take off on the mission, MacGruber spoils any element of surprise they had by going to a nightclub owned by Kunth and announcing their presence and their location. So to build on this, the next day MacGruber has Vicky impersonate him in the coffee shop they said they were going to be at. MacGruber is telling Vicky what to do through an earpiece, and this whole sequence is funny and further drives home that MacGruber is kind of a piece of shit. And by kind of, I mean absolutely a piece of shit. Kunth's henchmen don't fall for the bait and instead begin to open fire on the van where Grubbs and Dixon are instructing Vicky. Vicky hilariously loses her mind in the copy shop, hearing them get shot, and MacGruber actually manages to come in clutch and take out the shooter with a miracle mop. After searching Old Boy's car, they learn he's on his way to a weapons deal. So obviously, Vicky has to dress up like the dealer and Dixon like MacGruber because that's just basic science. And it's in this moment we learn that MacGruber doesn't play like Homie, and Homie don't play like that. And by play like that, I mean use guns. Which is great because like 5 seconds later a gunfight ensues, but no worries, MacGruber comes through with one of his legendary celery-based battle tactics. So I'm not going to give a full play-by-play of the plot simply because if you haven't seen this movie, I want you to discover some of the best gags on your own. In my opinion, the thing that makes MacGruber sing is that every scenario is played completely straight. For the most part, Val Kilmer is deadly serious as Dieter von Kunth. Ryan Phillippe is the perfect straight man to Vicky and MacGruber's whole thing. And the Colonel is great as well. Rest in peace, Power Booth. The film, more or less, is a fundamentally sound 80s B-movie anchored by a completely incompetent, quite reprehensible lead. Keeping it firmly a buck, I'm a big Will Forte stan. His presence alone will get me to watch a movie. I was like one of 5 people who saw The Brothers Solomon in theaters. So I'm obviously biased, but I truly think he's giving a fantastic performance here. MacGruber, the character, is a strange blend of overconfidence, stupidity, yet surprisingly competent at times. So many of the plot points revolve around MacGruber actively making the situation worse and worse before somehow managing to eke out a dub, usually in a hilarious and grotesque way. He's not asked to stretch this muscle too much in the film, but the few moments where MacGruber is being completely sincere ring true due to Forte's performance. The fact that within the span of one scene, he can have you laughing as he says, "Tell me what you want me to fuck," and then have you feeling some degree of sympathy when he reveals that Kunth is the man who killed his wife is no small feat. Kristen Wiig is fantastic as Vicky St. Elmo. She generally is the pawn in most of MacGruber's schemes, and her role in the team is somewhat ill-defined, which is honestly what makes it funnier to me. The jokes in the movie come both from the one-liners and absurd scenarios, but also from how well it manages to send up this particular era of action movie. To some degree, it's a straight-up parody film. It's just not done in the way we'd come to expect from parody movies at the time. Talking about the date movies, the epic movies, the Meet Spartans, those parodies. But unlike those, this movie is actually funny and shows some basic degree of filmmaking competence. If you're not as familiar with the era of action films the movie is lampooning, some of the specific jokes may fall flat. Specifically jokes that come from like the technical filmmaking itself, because on a technical level, the movie goes all in on replicating the aesthetics of 80s action thrillers. The hilariously awful sex scene between MacGruber and Vicky has Taccone and cinematographer Brandon Trost going full Tony Scott with the lighting setups. The action in the film is nothing to write home about, but it's surprisingly more technically sound than the shaky cam that dominated so many of the action movies of the late 2000s and early 2010s. Most SNL movies generally were just the core premise stretched out across 90 minutes. MacGruber only does the actual premise of the sketch and the climax of the movie where it makes the most sense. It doesn't even repeat the gag, it's just the one moment. I feel like in general, comedies are only well reviewed when it's on some bougie shit that doesn't really entertain but allows the intelligentsia to sound smart when writing, talking about it, at least in recent years. If it's important, then it's good. And MacGruber is not important. It is dumb as fuck. And that's what makes it great. Humor, like horror, is incredibly subjective. It's common for great films in both genres to divide an audience because what's scary or funny to one person may just completely not be another person's cup of tea. While MacGruber didn't find its audience in theaters, through DVD and streaming, it slowly amassed a cult following through the years. So much so that a sequel in the form of a show was released on Peacock a decade later. You know how I know they were desperate in the streaming age when they were fuck it, pull MacGruber out, that'll get them to subscribe. But thankfully they did, because if you like MacGruber and you haven't seen the show, you gotta give it a watch. It's only 8 eps, maintains the same joke-a-minute pacing, and it's from the same creative team and the same cast. It is the MacGruber sequel we all wanted in TV show form. So if you have a fondness for 80s action movies, you're gonna love how accurately both the movie and the show lampoons them. MacGruber is only available for rental right now, but if it hits streaming or you happen to find a cheap physical copy, it is well worth a watch. It's got laughs from start to finish, doesn't overstay its welcome, and is generally just a fun way to kill 90 minutes. So, that's my spiel. I'll see you next time when I talk about the best parody film I know you haven't seen.